Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, this is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. Today I want to touch upon three topics that I estimate to be of importance, although they don't get many headlines. One topic is the so-called two-state solution. This was supposed to be the answer to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Actually, it was first devised by the Peel Commission back at the end of the 1930s as a solution to the problems in Palestine under the British Mandate. Then it came up again in a UN decision in 1948 as a solution to the same problem. Then it came up a third time in 1993 in the so-called Oslo Accords. So it has been around for a number of years and disappeared during the Trump administration, but the two-state solution has returned quite forcefully during the first 100 days of the Biden administration. And I discussed some worrying trends in the U.S. Congress, especially since the Democrats became the majority in both houses. This is worrisome because American aid to Israel depends on Congress, not on the administration, and the Congress has some very outspoken anti-Israel members and others who claim to be friends of Israel but whose actions prove otherwise. We may expect to see changes in the American relationship with Israel under this administration supported by a Democratic Congress. And I'll say a few words about a branch of the Israeli Defense Forces that does not get any big headlines, but does a tremendous amount of work to keep Israel safe. Much of its activities are clandestine, and we hear little or nothing of its actions that work to keep us safe. I'm referring to the Israeli Navy, and I'll say just a few words about the Navy and its activities, just to bring the listeners up to date. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back after the break.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. I want to say a few words about a term that used to be very popular, and then particularly during the Trump administration, it stopped being popular. You didn't hear it anymore. And now, under the Biden administration, that word has become popular again. The word which I am referring to, or I should say the expression that I am referring to, is the two-state solution. Now, one first began to hear it actually back in 1948 when the area here in Palestine was supposed to be divided into a Jewish state and an Arab state. At that time, they didn't use the word Palestinian, and I don't recall if they kept using the term over the years or just died away by itself. But the term two-state solution became very popular under the previous administration, before Trump, that is, the administration in which Biden was the vice president under Obama. Now, the question arises whether the generally use of the term two-state solution has any relation really to its context and what it really means in the reality of what's happening here in Israel and the Palestinian areas, or whether it takes into account the complex and practical aspects of the realization of something called the two-state solution. It's a useful slogan, and people use the term in the international community, and it's become pretty much lip service to a growing international trend. This term has come back into use in the last several months under the new Biden administration. In addition to some former Israeli leaders, this term, the two-state solution, is being repeated almost every day by White House and State Department spokespersons and other administration officials of the Biden administration. It's being used again by international leaders and organizations, just as it was during the Obama administration. Just a week week and a half ago, there was an annual conference of an organization called J Street, which is a left-wing organization, and they brought in various speakers, and I'll say who they were in a moment. The conference was actually held virtually because of the conditions, and the two-state mantra is figuring high among the stated priorities of the participants. The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas spoke at J Street at their convention as a keynote speaker. And he said that the two-state solution based on pre-June 1967 borders based on international law with East Jerusalem as its capital is the solution to the problem. This is what he says publicly. It's not what he says to his own people. There are others who are pretty much not listened to here in Israel, like the former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, always talks about the two-state solution, but I don't think many people pay attention to him anymore. Other people who spoke in favor of the two-state solution were House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, also a Democrat. Now, just as in the past, this expression is being spoken quite liberally as a form of a generalized wishful thinking. It's looked upon as the only solution to the Palestinian-Israeli dispute, but all this is being done without any awareness of the history or what the practical implications are and the feasibility of such a thing, a two-state solution, in light of the realities of what's really happening here. It's being repeated despite the fact that a two-state solution has never been accepted and agreed to by the parties in the dispute, and despite the fact that the permanent status of the territories, as agreed in the Oslo Accords back in 1993, still remain an open issue which is supposed to be negotiated. So this continuous call for a two-state solution would be an attempt to prejudge the outcome of negotiating process, a process which really has not occurred. The 1991-93 Oslo Accords remain the only agreed and still valid international legal basis for the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiation process. Interestingly enough, people seem to forget that. Everything is based on the Oslo Accords. Now, what at that time, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was represented by Yasser Arafat. Israel was represented by Prime Minister Rabin, and the accords were countersigned by the leaders of the United States, the European Union, Russia, Norway, and Egypt. Norway was involved because this whole thing took place in Oslo. They make no mention of the ultimate outcome of the permanent status negotiations, whether it's in terms of a one-state solution, two-state solution, three-state solution, maybe including Jordan, maybe a federation, maybe a confederation, all kind of possibilities to settle the problems or the issues between Israel and the Palestinians. All this is left to the parties to negotiate. To negotiate in good faith. Well, that's a question unto itself. So, according to the Oslo Accords, the solution cannot be imposed, it can't be prejudged, it can't be predetermined by all kind of political conditions or international organizations or by wishful thinking of political leaders. So the two-state outcome has become a standard component of non-binding United Nations political documentation. However, the two-state solution has never been part of any formal binding resolution or any agreement between the parties. The accepted and logical assumption has been that whatever solution will be achieved between Israel and the Palestinians will only be through negotiation and agreement between the parties and not through the imposition of a solution. Without prejudgment of the outcome or any kind of negotiation other than between the parties. Clearly, any concept of a two-state solution that would indeed include the establishment of a Palestinian state alongside Israel could only come from direct negotiations between Israel and a unified Palestinian leadership, which there is no unified Palestinian leadership today. No solution can come through partisan political resolutions coming from the UN or from any other source, or from vague calls from international leaders for a two-state solution as a form of collective wishful thinking. In other words, the two-state solution, which has never been defined except as something that's going to come about through agreement between the two parties, Israel and the Palestinians. That is what the two-state solution is supposed to be. Of course, the Palestinians refuse even to speak to Israel, so the chances of arriving at a two-state solution or what that two-state solution would look like, all of this is really only wishful thinking. What's happened is that the term, which went out of style, particularly during the Trump administration, has come back into use in the Biden administration, which took office only back in January. They're talking about the two-state solution already, but as it always was, it's something that's supposed to be decided upon by the parties involved, primarily only Israel and the Palestinians. And the Palestinians at the moment not only are they refusing to talk to Israel, but they can't get their own act together. The president, Mahmoud Abbas, is now in the 11th year of his 4-year term, and they're debating whether or not they should have new elections. So that is the history of the two-state solution. So the chances of a two-state solution in the foreseeable future are really zero at best. If it could be anything less than zero. But you hear the term being used again and again in the Biden administration, and that is very unfortunate because it's really something undefined that will probably not happen in our lifetimes. I'll be back after the break.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. I want to talk in this segment of the program two things you don't hear much about. One is the Israeli Navy. Whenever you hear people talk about Israel, they talk about the Army, they talk about the Air Force. But Israel has a Navy, a strong Navy, and is actually a two-ocean Navy. The Mediterranean, and through the port of Aqaba, we have the Red Sea, and as far as that'll take into the even into the Indian Ocean. So Israel has a two-ocean Navy. The other thing you don't hear much about is the shadow war, which is going on now, a shadow war that's going on with great intensity. It's primarily between Israel and Iran in the areas of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Our Navy is comprised of three main active units. They're called flotillas. And there is also a submarine unit and a commando unit. While the commando unit and the submarine unit enjoy the fame of secret elite units that carry out missions beyond enemy lines, one of the three other groups, the third flotilla, is an integral part of the Navy's activities during routine times, as well as during emergencies and, of course, during a war. So the commander of the third flotilla reported that each unit holds abilities and capabilities that the other one lacks. In other words, there are three major units in the Navy that supplement each other. This is what allows the Navy to be successful in its missions, the way that these groups operate with each other. Each flotilla of the three main flotilla knows how to bring its advantages to the battlefield and to compensate the disadvantage of the others. For example, one flotilla knows how to secretly operate in the sea and on shore. Another one knows how to operate very close to enemy shores. And the third group knows how to gain control over a large sea area and to deal with a variety of threats. Each unit is essentially connected. They have tremendous intelligence collecting ability, and they help support commandos in covert activities in enemy territory. The one flotilla is based on 6 fighting troops that use different kinds of battleships. All ships, including the older ones that are constantly updated and re-outfitted, use the latest technology in all the naval fields. These ships are equipped with missile defense systems, sea-to-sea, sea-to-air, sea-to-surface missiles, cannons, light weapons, and advanced intelligence and electronic warfare capabilities. Some have unique capabilities such as submarine exposure and attack weapons. So they work together, by the way, with other navies around the world, but they have the capabilities of all the other foreign navies. So the whole idea of the Navy is to maintain maritime superiority. They protect Israel's seas, the economic path. They defend the essential infrastructure, such as the gas and oil platforms, and they keep the country's trade routes open. You don't hear much about the Navy, and considering the fact that in 1948, when Israel came into existence, they essentially had no navy. Today, it is a major arm of the defense of Israel. Now, in recent years, the Navy has been undergoing major changes. It redefined its goals, the way it operates, the way it prepares for war, and how it works in integration with the rest of the Israeli army. The they fight against other navies. They land troops on other shores. They've developed new weapon systems and combat doctrines that help to apply new perceptions. They've created new operational plans that combine new perceptions with technologies that are new and weapons that are new. So they work, of course, in parallel and cooperation with the army and the rest of the group. So there's a new plan that was put out by the head of the Israeli army, General Aviv Kochavi. It's called Tnufa. It's a multi-year plan, which apparently was approved, but I understand there's a problem now with the budget because the fact we don't have a government. And without a government, you don't have a budget. So the plan aims to strengthen the ability of different units of different branches to be interoperable, to use their different capabilities in day-to-day activities as well as in times of war. Now, it's very interesting. According to a recent Israeli Army Intelligence Directorate assessment, it held that the Israeli front most likely to erupt and develop into a campaign is the northern front. It is believed that Hezbollah is still seeking to avenge the death of its operatives last summer in Syria in an airstrike that's attributed to the IAF. Israel, the major operatives of the Hezbollah were killed by air attack, and Israel never said a word about it. In other words, Israel didn't take credit for it, but it's assumed that Israel did it. In the next war in the north, there'll be an amount of fire coming from the sea that was never seen before. That is from our forces. Israel is preparing primarily for a war in the north. It would be a severe blow to the enemy without even the land forces landing or even the Air Force attacking Hezbollah. The Navy itself will be in a position to focus on this front. Also because the Navy, because of the fact it stays out in the sea, not far from the shores of places like Lebanon, they can gather intelligence. So the Navy, if there is a war, particularly in the north, the Navy will really have a big role. First, in maintaining the maritime superiority, and also making sure that the Army's tasks are carried out. In other words, even if our Army has to go into Lebanon, it'll be supported from the sea. The Navy claims, and I assume it's true, that they have firepower that's disproportional in comparison what it had in the past. So that's in case of a war, but in general also, the Navy carries out routine drills on a daily basis. They carry out drills that involve almost all of its ships, and they did an exercise included dealing with a fire that broke out in one of their ships. What happens when a ship has to be dragged by another one, and also the threat of small vessels, which the terrorists can have, attacking the ship. The It's interesting. They have been working on this day and night, and it's something you don't hear much about. It doesn't get into the newspapers. They are constantly updating both the information that they gather and their response. The details are constantly updated very quickly. There are many elements that need to be taken into account, and it's up to the commanders to make the decision. According to the head of the Israeli Navy, what makes the Navy so powerful is not only the advanced technology and munitions, but the people. For example, he quoted the head of the Navy, Barak, his name is. He said there are 20 different professions on a particular ship. They have they have people who operate weapons. There are those who gather intelligence. They maintain advanced electronic systems. They have engine and mechanical systems that are updated all the time. According to the head of the Navy, each sailor does the job of 3 soldiers in a standing army in any other navy, and they're quite proud of what they're doing. So I just wanted to say these few words about the Israeli Navy, which is doing a job day and night that we don't hear much about. Matter of fact, sometimes we hear nothing about it, but it allows us to sleep well at night, even though it doesn't get the headlines. So I just wanted to share this information with the listeners to know that the Israeli Navy is really an important arm of our defense and offense. I'll be back after the break.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, I am Walter Bingham. If you want to hear the news behind the news and the true perspective on world affairs, then the Walter Bingham File is the program for you. We bring you interviews with the movers and shakers, political commentaries, and on-the-spot reports of events as they happen. All here every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. Eastern time. And it's all archived on our website. Make it a date.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. I wanted to say a few words about the relationship with the United States. I am not an expert on politics, but just what one reads and understands from the headlines and the details in various articles in various newspapers and journals. It's apparent and it's true, that the foundation of the relationship between the United States and Israel is not, in a sense, grounded in the executive branch. Whoever's president doesn't make that much difference because the relationship is grounded in Congress, not in the White House. It is that relationship which has always been responsible for the stability between Washington and Jerusalem over the years, particularly since the Kennedy administration. So no matter who is president, if it doesn't matter whether they're for 4 years or for 8 years, it is the people in Congress who make the decisions that really relate to Israel. Certainly, the person occupying the White House, the president, can make the relationship easier or more difficult. So, too, the behavior displayed by Israel can bring about a more relaxed relationship or one that's filled with tension. We saw, for an example, that during the Trump administration, our prime minister was extremely close to President Trump. And the truth of the matter is that this may have a negative return under the Biden administration. Maybe our prime minister was too close to Trump. Anyhow, what happened is that a bipartisan group of 328 members of Congress sent a letter last week to the Appropriations Committee to support in their words, robust funding for Israel's security without added conditions. Now, all this happened 3 days after there were speeches by two Democratic senators, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who spoke at a J Street conference. J Street is a very left-wing organization that competes more or less with AIPAC, a lobbying group for Israel that's been very effective. And during the Trump administration, Trump pretty much ignored J Street, but now the administration is more friendly toward J Street. So what happened was that these 328 members of Congress wrote a letter saying that and I quote, "We strongly believe that robust U.S. foreign assistance is vital to ensuring our national security interests abroad. One program that enjoys particularly strong bipartisan backing, urged to continuous, is the full funding of security assistance to Israel. Our aid to Israel is a vital and cost-effective expenditure which advances important U.S. national security interests in a highly challenging region. America's closest Mideast ally, Israel, regularly provides the United States with unique intelligence information and advanced defensive weapon systems. We recognize that not every member of Congress will agree with every policy decision of the Israeli government, but we urge support." Now, that's what this bipartisan group said in their letter to the Appropriations Committee. And that's really important. So you have to take into account that the Congress is critical in the relation because it's Congress that allocates U.S. aid, not the administration. Now, for example, the 2022 congressional budget is stated to allocate $3.8 billion to Israel. Now, this sum was agreed upon back in 2016 in agreement between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu. It was part of a 10-year memorandum of understanding signed between the two countries. And the truth of the matter is that an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, is pretty much like a treaty. But the one who delivers on a deal is not the president, it's the Congress that allocates the money. So having support in Congress is really the real basis and foundation for American support in actuality. Now, support for Israel has been bipartisan with almost complete support from both congressional parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, for many years. However, since the new administration came into office, there started to be some leaks in the relationship. They're beginning a lot of the anti-Israel newspapers and other outlets are declaring the beginning of the end of the unfettered pro-Israel congressional orientation. And as I said, at a virtual J Street conference, two Democratic senators suggested that aid to Israel be conditional. So what they're trying to do is link U.S. aid to Israel's behavior toward the Palestinians. Now, these two senators, Warren and Sanders, spoke at the J Street a couple of days before a Democratic representative from Minnesota introduced a bill calling for the prohibition of U.S. taxpayer money to foster what she called human rights violations against Palestinians and annexation or demolition of Palestinian homes. In other words, this Democratic senator came up with a bill to essentially cut off part of the aid to Israel. So the AIPAC, of course, gathered supporters, and that resulted in this letter that I mentioned a few moments ago, getting 328 members to sign it. This was in response to this attempt now to condition aid to Israel on the way it treats the Palestinian. So the letter, as I read, I just read part of it, was short and to the point. Essentially, what it said is that aid to Israel is in the national security interest of the United States. And Israel has always said that it will take care of itself. They said, give us the support and we will defend ourselves and see to it that there is calm in the Middle East. Other areas of the world, the United States has to send troops and other forms of aid other than financial aid. And Israel says, no, we'll do the job, just give it the money. Now, let me define what the new problem is, as I see it, and I've seen people writing about. For several years, there's been a move by what is being called the more progressive elements in Congress, who want to condition aid to Israel with several, if you will, conditions, I guess is the best word. For several years, the thinking was that progressive element was composed of just a four-person group of congressional representatives. They're known colloquially as the Squad. However, now there are 435 members of Congress. Now, those who signed the letter supporting Israel, there were 328. In other words, 328 out of 435. So that's about 100 different members difference. That means that 107 men and women of Congress did not sign, which is 25% of the Congress that did not sign, which is a significant number. That's not to say that those who did not sign are necessarily anti-Israel, but it does say that these members of Congress want to change the relationship to Israel. and they want to change from what it's been. There's a new trend away from unconditional support of Israel, which is a potentially dangerous trend, really dangerous. So Israel can take care of itself, but in politics, it never hurts to have powerful friends in high places, and we may be losing support in the American House of Representatives. I just want to share those thoughts with the listeners. I hope I'm not being overly pessimistic, but it is an obvious trend since the Biden administration came in and the Democrats took control of Congress. It's something that our relationship may change, and it's got to be watched.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom!
Okay, wait a minute.
Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.